Hello all, we'll be starting in 1 minute. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Terry Albrecht with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and Waste Reduction Partners. I'm going to be your session moderator today. I wish to welcome you to the webinar, Managing Energy During Facility Curtailments and Shutdowns. With North Carolina manufacturers and industries facing many activities and decisions in response to the COVID-19 crisis, this event was created as a real-time peer sharing discussion for North Carolina industries with personnel and responsibilities in facilities and energy management. Through our panelists and Q&A today, we hope to share and discuss some of the approaches to energy and utility management of facility sites during shutdowns with those priorities of occupant health, asset protection, and of course, production. Today's webinar is being hosted by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. DEQ has several programs related to energy, including the State Energy Office. Today, this webinar is being brought to you by the North Carolina Environmental Stewardship Initiative and also Waste Reduction Partners, which is also part of DEQ, and it is administered by the Land of Sky Regional Council that has provided much of the infrastructure for today's event. Currently, we have over 50 registrants for this event, and just wanted to share a little bit of that breakdown today. About half of those are manufacturers and industry, about 40% are state and other resource providers. We have a handful of universities across a few states, as well as a few utilities. So I just want to thank all of our North Carolina industrial partners for helping share this event and share the information of this event. Here's a little glimpse of today's agenda. We're going to have 3 organizations presenting today and sharing their responses in utility management related to the COVID-19. Following that, we're going to have our Q&A discussion that'll run about 30 minutes. And I'm just going to kick things off with a couple of logistics slides. As we go forward, we're planning our event would not surpass 75 minutes. Okay, just a couple of housekeeping issues. If you're having any technical difficulties, I'd encourage you to use your phone and access audio via your phone. You should have received some phone number links in your registration, but they are listed here on screen if you need to call in. You can also use the webinar ID to call in if you're having problems. So that's going to be left on the screen. I wanted to let everyone know that we will be recording this event, and we will send all registrants a link to that recording, as well as some other resources that we hope to post. As I mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A discussion. We're going to encourage everyone to ask questions, and the way that you'll be asking questions are you'll be typing those into your control bar menu, your GoToWebinar menu that should be on your screen. Just click the questions link and type in your questions, and those will all be addressed when we get to that part of the session. Okay, so right now I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. We're very fortunate to have some great industry and industrial panelists today who very graciously offered their time to share the activities and processes that they've been employing during this COVID-19 crisis. We're especially thankful that they have come back on after we had some scheduling and some technical difficulties the first round. So we really appreciate them being part of this event. So I'll just quickly go through these introductions, and then we're just going to flow our presentations from one to the next after this introduction. So first up, we're going to have Eaton and Kurt Spicer, who is the Environment, Health, and Safety Manager with Eaton with their Raleigh plant and capital operations, will be reviewing their activities. And we're very fortunate also that Kurt has asked Rich Gorsay to also join in on that discussion. He is Eaton's Global Energy Manager, so we're really happy to have him on the line today. Following the Eaton presentation, we'll have Ted Chrisman with Uchiyama Manufacturing, located in Goldsboro. And Ted is the project's environment and safety manager there, and he'll be sharing their activities. They're actually in a partial shutdown mode at that site. Following those two manufacturers, we'll have Isaac Johnson, who is an energy engineer with Piedmont Services Group. Piedmont Services Group is also a member of the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, and they also serve as a vendor and a professional service provider for these manufacturers, and he's going to be focused a little bit more on the commercial operating environment as well. So I think among these three speakers, we're really going to have a nice coverage of this topic for today. So with that, I'm going to pass controls over to Kurt, and he can unmute himself and take over controls.
All right, welcome. Just make sure I got the view here right.
Yeah, looks good.
My name's Kirk Spicer. I'm based out at Raleigh, North Carolina. I've worked at a fair number of Eaton facilities, and some of the examples I'll show you are from those previous facilities, but by and large, how to shut down is very dependent upon what equipment we have in a facility. The first checklist I just wanted to share is related to one of our facilities that had a year-end shutdown. So they had a standard process that they would go through, look at specific areas within a facility. So there was a heat treat department in this facility. There was a wastewater treatment plant in this facility. So in particular departments, there would be somebody that would be responsible for making sure each individual task got done. So for the production area, there might be air conditioning that needed to get turned down or turned off. And then in main offices, you know, if we're going to shut the facility completely, they might actually bolt up those fire exits in case there's a loss of power if there's no person inside the facility. So this particular setup is really customized based on what the event is, what the task is, and where it's going to be done. And then we basically would have this Excel spreadsheet printed out, and we'd hand them to the individuals responsible. They would tick it as they completed that task, and then the manager or the last person in the facility would go around and just make sure that all those items got done as well. And this was just our shutdown checklist. We had the exact opposite for opening up a facility. So we would, about 6 to 12 hours before the facility would reopen, we'd go through and make sure that everything's turned back on that needs to get turned back on. And in some cases, especially with air conditioning, we'd do that even more prior to 12 hours before startup. So here's a different type of checklist. It's the same type of principle. So I'll jump back to that first one here in a second. But in this case, we just have the individual items instead of the areas. And that's mainly because we had very specific controls with these items, or there was very specific instructions for how to do these items. So on the previous page, it really was about task-oriented, do this, do this, do this. Anybody could just about go through and follow this checklist. On this other checklist that we developed, it really was specific to the unique circumstances with the compressors that we were dealing with, or our obsolescence, or our HVAC systems. So in this case, you might have separate HVAC systems for separate areas. You might set different temperatures. You can modify the checklist. We would modify it for every single shutdown we had. So in this case, I believe this was a Thanksgiving type weekend. So on Thursday, we were doing all these different things for that Thursday morning. And then by Friday, we would either touch it or leave it as is. Saturday, same thing. And then Sunday, we'd turn everything back on. And this was for a 3-shift operation, so it was very specific about what time the different tasks would occur. So overall, we just had homegrown checklists for the individual pieces of equipment and the individual areas, just based on what we had going on. These are some generic thoughts around common pieces of equipment that you might want to include on your checklist, but also ways to kind of avoid having so many items to check. Ideally, you automate as much of this as possible so that when you have an unexpected shutdown, you're not having to spend a lot of resources or time to bring everything down and then bring it all back up again. So here are some generic items. So if you have dock heaters or personal heaters throughout the facility, making sure those are timer-based, making sure that they're set up in a way where they can't be accidentally left on, both from a fire hazard standpoint, but you can burn through a lot of natural gas with some of these area heaters. Pre-programmed away modes. So if you're familiar with a Nest thermostat at home, in some of these automated systems, if you have a newer system, you can create a set point that'll work for your entire system, and pick that set point based on what's going to save you the most energy over that time period, or whatever you need to maintain your inventory at the climate it's supposed to be at. So for us, we might be storing batteries in some of our facilities, and we can't change that set point. But there is a pre-programmed setting so that it is keeping it at that ideal state the entire time we're gone. Motion sensors on lights and HVAC are kind of self-explanatory, but if you're able to automate when those turn on and off, it really allows you to not worry about a large portion of your facility to figure out where those different lights are being powered on, especially in the circumstances where you have older circuits and lights are coming on from different panels. Demand sensors are really helpful with compressors during downtimes. If you need to run one compressor but not the others, you can shut off individual compressors, but it's real nice to be able to have sensors that can do that automatically for you, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Same thing with the variable frequency drive, or if you have multiple units for boilers or HVACs, and you're able to shut some down and leave others running, that might be a way to save energy during a shutdown. Or, this is not just for shutdowns, right? For curtailments, if you're not really running a lot of heat generating equipment, you might not need as much HVAC capacity, and you might be able to turn off the least efficient HVAC units that you have. So if you have one or two that you know are not as efficient as the newer ones, shut those down first, and you're going to be saving more money that way. If there's nobody in the building, you can possibly look at your economizers and considering reducing that down. I think there's a set point just based on your particular facility and how much fresh air you need to bring into the building in order to maintain good climate. But if there's no one inside the building, just like locking all the doors, You might be able to set those economizers down to 0 and just recirculate your air the entire time. Really based on your situation, though, if you have chemicals or off-gassing or anything like that, you wouldn't necessarily want to make your facility closed loop like that. Energy Saver UPSs, this is a product that Eaton makes, but it's just a generic plug saying that you might have equipment that is outdated, and if you upgrade that equipment, there's possibilities that it will automatically reduce its power consumption when there's no load or when it detects that there's no issues on the grid. Office items, another automatic one is if you know you're going to be having a facility closure, or if you're going to be sending home a lot of salary staff or folks that might be in the office environment, you can ask people to go through and take home their chargers, their laptops, and their personal lighting, or at least ask them to unplug items that you know are going to generate some energy demand, such as heaters, monitors, lights, that sort of thing. In a large office environment, it takes a very long time to go through, 200, 300, 400 cubes for a maintenance person versus sending one quick email reminder the day before you're going to be sending folks home, hey, make sure you do this, this, and this. It can be really helpful and save a lot of energy that way. And the last item on here was isolating circuits and panels. If you've already upgraded your systems, or you plan to upgrade your systems in the near future, think about ways to isolate the things that are critical from non-critical. If you know you have a panel where it's not powering anything important, and you're able to shut it all down, you might be able to do that at the circuit level. But you need to be careful. If you're going to turn that back on and there's a high demand, you can cause more problems there from a safety standpoint. So be careful with that. But in general, it might be easier for you to isolate and control some of those office type nice to haves on the same circuit and turn them off at a breaker. Here's just an example of the Energy Saver UPS that we offer. Just like with compressors or anything else, if you're able to upgrade to something that can run at a high efficiency mode or no load mode, it allows you to not worry about that equipment during a shutdown. So think about those upgrades that you can do. Maybe not now, right, during the time when everybody's cutting back capital, but instead of just thinking about efficiencies during normal times, think about efficiencies during shutdowns or curtailments as well. You're not going to have somebody that's going to be able to babysit everything, so the more automation you can have with energy savings, the better. And now I'm going to hand it, or I got one more slide here before I hand it over to Rich. But at a global level, Eaton does a pretty good job at tracking energy demand on a monthly basis and kind of trending that at a plant level. There's a system that we utilize to do that. During a curtailment or during these unplanned downtimes, it might appear like you're getting a lot of energy savings, or it might appear like you're getting really good reductions, but it's not true, right? You're shutting down a facility, you're not building as much product. If you're going through and doing the ISO 50001 process, you should pick out a KPI that allows you to flex what you're tracking according to how much you're producing or how many people are in the building, something that might be relevant for these type of time periods. So you can see if you're doing better during these time periods, or if you're really remaining flat based on how much product you're still purchasing or still making, or how many people are still in the building. So here you can kind of see that classic seasonal trend, right, where June, July are peaking. If you're going through a curtailment, you would expect to see that dip down a little bit more. But if you're able to run this number and divide it by how many people are inside the facility, it might make more sense when you're going back and doing an analysis. But with that, you might be reducing your demand on the grid. And so that's why I wanted to pull Rich in, just to talk about considerations when you do decide to pull back from how much you're going to consume.
Okay. Rich Gorsay, I appreciate that, Kirk, and Terry also for having the opportunity to speak a little bit on the supply side. So instead of talking about like electricity, I was going to focus a little bit more on natural gas in this instant. And this really applies to both what we're going through currently with shutdowns with COVID versus just your actual seasonal outages that you may have. So it kind of covers both spectrums on it, and planned shutdowns or force majeure activities. And so today I just want to take a couple minutes, and we can always go through more in some of the questions, but to focus on natural gas, it's really important that you understand your contracts and that you understand what your boundaries are to be able to work within that. I was just going to speak a little bit about some different types of contracts that you have and what you need to consider during these shutdowns. You may have a fixed price contract. You may have something that moves with the market. You'd have to look at your specific and work with your supplier to know the details of it. So whether it's a force majeure or a plant shutdown that you're scheduling, or let's say some act of God that would shut down your plant, and I believe COVID-19 is falling into that category too, where some utilities are actually considering this differently than other plant shutdowns. So what I would suggest is looking at your contract. I'm not sure if it's operations or EHS on the phone, but someone at your plant should be familiar and be a point of contact with your supplier. And there's sometimes different bandwidths that are associated with that contract and how much gas volume you're going to be using. In the case of maybe plus or minus 10% bandwidth, could be 20%, could be full requirements, or a take or pay situation. You really have to investigate on your own on how that works. So what happens is that you have this contract, your natural production, and all of a sudden you have an event where you need to shut down for a week. Well, what happens in that contract is the potential that you have volumes with that swing of 10%, let's say. If you go outside of that tolerance, either above or below, that excess gas in the system has to go somewhere. It's planned, it's scheduled, it goes upstream to your supplier, and you could have the potential for some penalties on that, because if you settled at a fixed price, let's say the market's below it, you have to sell that gas back into the system. You might see that on your invoice, and that may be a penalty that the plant has to absorb. So really, kind of the moral here is stay in communication with your supplier, know your contract, and what the utility or supplier may call it is an OFO or an operational flow order. And whether you're with PSMC or Piedmont, in certain situations, they may dictate what that bandwidth is on volumes as that event occurs. And so that's important because I've seen that in the past where it went 2 and 3 times your average price. And you have to be careful of that doesn't come back to your plant when you're doing some shutdowns. So going a little bit further down into the slide, just to save a little bit of time, recommendations: have a plant contact that knows how the operation is working, can estimate what your volume reductions would be, and be able to communicate that to the utilities with as much notice as possible. It's critical to keep those communications going because obviously it helps with saving on any penalties. It also builds a good relationship with that supplier. And I know that through this recent events with COVID, I've been reaching out to a lot of suppliers across the U.S. and making sure, and I know they really appreciate a heads up if we have a scheduled plant shutdown for a week or some term. So kind of went through it kind of quick, but I'll be glad to field any questions later on.
Well, great. Rich, Kirk, thank you so much for sharing that guidance. some really important information, both operational and on the supply side. We appreciate that. We're gonna move into our with our second organization with Ted Chrisman. So Ted, if you want to unmute and jump in. Oh, Ted, I don't think we're hearing you yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Okay.
now hear you. So very good.
Yeah.
We're good.
I just wanted to thank everyone, Terry, Kurt, and Rich. Thank everyone for joining in today. Uchiyama's a plant here in Goldsboro. We a little bit smaller organization. We manufacture automotive gaskets, hub seals, anti-lock brake components, things like that for a number of tier one suppliers for the automotive. And those folks are essential, actually. We're IATF 16949 certified, which for those not familiar with that, that's the quality aspect for automotive industry. ISO 14001 certified. We're environmental stewards. Recently got our OSHA Sharp, and we're looking into the ISO 45001, be compliant, but not necessarily be certified. All the other two programs we have to be certified. Our customers require us to be certified to those, so that hasn't come about with the ISO 45001 yet. So if you want to hit that next slide there, Terry. As I said, our customers still require us to provide them support for parts. Those customers expect it, and right now they are in response to the COVID-19. Most of those have shut down, and we keep getting backed up to the point that they've said they were going to start on April 20th. They backed it up to April 27th, and they were going to start production again on. It's backed up through May 4th now is our latest date. We've had to reduce production by nearly 75%. Last week's production was actually only 8%. So obviously we have some energy concerns here when we're still trying to run production just to meet some of those products. One of our main things that we had to work on was how we're going to do that. And shutting down these machines was one of the biggest things that we could do for obvious reasons. These injection mold machines, they produce a lot of heat. So we have had to adjust schedules, personnel schedules, staggering shifts. We have some people that are working three days on and 2 days off. But with this reduced production, that requirement, we are trying to just build up a stock to where once this all does come to an end, that we can still support. We're expecting some type of an influx of production there on the opposite end of this COVID-19 situation. We have had to do some reduction in forces. I just wanted to let everybody know that this thing's kind of responding to everyone. It's affecting everyone, and everyone's having to respond to it. So we've, like I said, we've had to shut down machines and try to get the best efficiencies out of it to try to reduce our energy consumption here. Next slide. About 5 or 6 years ago, this is going to be a post-event power restoration, how we go about restoring power to our plant. About 5 or 6 years ago, a little bit of history here. Every time we had a power surge of any type, we would end up having 2 to 3 machines that were down for a day or two, not figuring out why, just because of power surges. So about a year or 2 years ago, we had bus bars that were damaged due to ice, freezing weather and stuff. Kind of made us look into some other things. We've went ahead and put surge protectors on all of our switch gears and panels, which helps us to prevent any damage to our equipment. During these shutdowns, if they're long enough, if the power's out for a long enough period of time, what we do is we have a team that goes out, very small team. We're a small organization. We have a small team that goes out and automatically goes through a check sheet that, just like Kirk was saying, there's a check sheet for just about everything. They'll go out and open switch gears, and if time permits, they open up all the disconnects on all the machines so that when we do come back to start up our processes, that we're not hitting all that power at one time for when those events do come about. We start all of our process equipment first, our boiler, cooling towers, air compressors. We do have a couple of automated systems, the IntelliFlow for our air compressors, like Kirk was talking about, which that helps us to save on our energy, especially for the air compressors. The air is an expensive energy consumer. One of the things that we do have to have because of IATF is we have to have a contingency plan for any type of our critical equipment. That contingency plan is, no matter what happens, we still have to provide our product to the end users or for the manufacturers, and they don't necessarily like the excuses. Well, we didn't have no air, we didn't have no power. So my suggestion is just to have a contingency plan for your critical equipment listing. If you have a critical equipment list, have a contingency plan saying that, you can, if you lose power, you lose a whole bus or something like that, you can go get a generator. You can have cooling towers, come in, brought in, rented in, boilers, any type of that equipment that's necessary for your process. You need to have that plan so it doesn't shut you down. We also had to evaluate our high energy equipment, trying to identify, what machines, once we started bringing our equipment back up online, we didn't, like I said, we don't want that our energy demand to be shutting down other aspects of the whole power grid, I guess. But we have machines that we would bring each of those machines up one at a time, bring them up to a temperature. Our injection mold machines had to get up to the temperature, so we would gradually bring all of our equipment up and not like I say, kind of reduce that energy, that demand at that time. We'd start all those machines one at a time, go through each department. I guess all I'm saying is that what Kirk was explaining is those check sheets to go ahead and work those out and those prior to any situation so that you don't have any events that are going to shut your production down for a long period of time. And the last slide there is what I'll just say. Like I said, this will be short and sweet for y'all. I thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please just ask during the question and answer period. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ted. We appreciate you sharing that excellent information. Next up, we have Isaac Johnson with Piedmont Service Group, and I'm going to pass controls to Isaac.
All right, you see that, Terry?
Not quite yet. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, there we go.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isaac Johnson, and I'm standing in for our primary speaker, Mr. Dale Cranford. And we're going to talk briefly today about managing energy during curtailments or shutdowns. Our agenda for this afternoon is to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on facility operations, review HVAC and building automation system best practices, investigate building analytics, see what opportunity exists for maintenance and equipment replacements, And lastly, we'll cover energy audits. First, let's review some of the obvious impacts of COVID-19 on facility operations as it pertains to HVAC. Occupancy patterns have changed as a result of Executive Order 121 issued by Governor Cooper in response to COVID-19. All non-essential businesses are closed unless permitted by the Secretary of Revenue. The workforce has been grouped into essential and non-essential businesses. And even among the essential businesses, there are not very many business as usual companies out there right now. Non-essential facilities and facilities that have implemented work from home policies are either completely closed or have limited on-site presence, which presents a great opportunity for facility managers to reduce energy consumption. Essential facilities, in some cases, are adding capacity, increasing occupancy, and adding operating hours to allow more time for cleaning and disinfecting, which presents a challenge for facility managers to control energy consumption and ensure the health and safety of the employees. So what can facility managers do to manage energy during curtailments or shutdowns, and what HVAC and building automation system best practices can be followed? And since not all manufacturing facilities are closed, what are some HVAC and building automation system best practices for ensuring safety of employees for those that are still occupied? There's going to be a wide range of building automation capability for everyone on this call, but I'll try to keep it as broad and basic as I can. For closed buildings or areas of occupied buildings that are not being used, facility managers can apply the unoccupied schedules used for holidays, weekends, or special events to the period of time that the business is impacted by the curtailment or shutdown, and only use the occupied schedules for HVAC equipment that is either essential to the current operation or HVAC equipment that serves critical equipment. The following are guidelines from the CDC related to HVAC. So they are also best practices, but I would encourage everyone to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. The CDC has highlighted two critical factors for commercial facilities during COVID-19 pandemic. The first, ventilation for buildings still operating is critical, serves and infrastructure, and two, cooling tower safety after a prolonged shutdown. The CDC recommends increasing ventilation rates in occupied buildings or increasing the percentage of outside air being introduced. Allowing as much as 100% outside air allows your building to flush out regularly, however, not at the expense of relative humidity. CDC guidelines for relative humidity ranging from 30 to 60% are equally as important. Stagnant or standing water in cooling towers can cause conditions that increase the risk for growth and spread of biofilm associated bacteria. So ensure that your cooling towers are maintained, including startup and shutdown procedures per manufacturer's guidelines and industry best practices. So evaluate your tower and make sure that the tower and basin are free of visible slime and biofilm before use or restart. COVID-19 has answered a very important question in the world of building automation and control, which is, why is remote monitoring and control so important? During this downtime, facility managers should be reviewing any available trend data to optimize energy consuming systems and use the data review to direct maintenance activities. As an example, using trend data from our building analytics platform for a facility that has 3 80-ton package rooftop units with demand control ventilation, I recently found 3 combination thermostat CO2 sensors that had failed for one of the rooftop units. They had failed and they were stuck at a CO2 reading of 1,150 parts per million, which is probably about 350 parts per million above what would be considered comfortable, which was causing the rooftop unit to provide maximum outdoor air. As we were troubleshooting the first fault, we also found that the morning warm-up sequence wasn't set up properly. So these cascading issues are not something that you'll discover through a visual inspection of the equipment. If you get a cold call as a facilities manager, you might turn up the thermostat, and if that doesn't work, you might override a hot water sequence for the boiler, and these actions have energy penalties. So, try to monitor your BAS and review your trend data. And if you're not set up for remote monitoring now, request it, because although COVID-19 restrictions might be eased over the summer, some experts are cautioning of a possible resurgence of COVID-19 in the fall, and we all want to be better prepared for that. So, do you have any projects or deferred maintenance that you've been putting off because it would impact operations? These curtailments or shutdowns provide an excellent opportunity to perform maintenance with less impact on facility operations. Many major HVAC and electrical projects for equipment replacement or maintenance are only ever done during holiday shutdowns and weekends because of their impact on operations. And they get priced, time and a half or premium time by your vendors. Now you have an opportunity to schedule this work during normal business hours. You should be able to get a better price from your vendors. So, try to revisit the capital plans for replacement of equipment that's nearing at or past the end of its useful life. Lastly, I would encourage everyone here to invest time in performing an energy audit. Shutdowns provide an opportunity to conduct facility surveys to identify energy efficiency upgrades. Try to get involvement from the employees at your facility for an Easter egg hunt and survey the HVAC equipment and controls, lighting systems, and water systems for opportunities to reduce energy consumption. If you are a Duke Energy customer, investigate the Smart Saver program. If you're opted into the rider and you don't use it, it might make more sense to opt out of the program. Or conversely, if you're opted out of the rider and you have a large energy efficiency project coming up, it might make sense to opt back into the program. And that could make the difference in whether or not your projects receive funding. So I really appreciate everyone taking time to participate in this webinar today, and I look forward to hearing your questions. If it's something that I don't have an answer for, I'll follow up with you with an answer as soon as I can.
All right, thank you, Isaac. I'm gonna take back over controls here. Okay, this brings us to the question and answer discussion portion, and my colleague Scott Pfister with the North Carolina Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service is going to be handling the Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
All right, thanks, Terry. Well, there's such great presentations and great information. We have one question, but before we get to that one question, I just know that I just want to share some highlights and then introduce one of our additional panelists for the Q&A. I know some of my highlights were the checklists and contracts to review from Eaton. Ted also presented a lot of contingency plan thoughts. And then Isaac really touched on some kind of more granular looking at data review from building automation systems. And so now I want to introduce Walt Rogowski from Santa Fe Natural Tobacco. And I didn't know if, again, we've covered a lot of different areas here. Walt, do you have any highlights that you'd like to share?
No, we actually do a lot of everything that everybody said. We have gone through the whole plant and replaced everything with LED lighting with motion sensors to reduce the effect of COVID on us is not been very big because we have to remain open. We are one of the critical ones that they want to stay open. So our plant is running 24/5, and the shutdowns on the weekends, we follow the checklists. We recently took out a really old boiler and put in a right size boiler, and then had a duplicity. We put one right next to it. So we did the whole contingency plan to back ourselves up, and we've been following right along with the 50,001 stuff and trying to get everything transitioned to 2018.
Well, great, excellent. Thank you, Walt. So as I mentioned, we had one question coming here, and this one is directed towards Kirk. Early on in the presentation, you had mentioned shutting off heat towards the dock area, and I'm going to just kind of broaden this question up to just kind of the facility in general, not just towards the dock. But how do you handle freeze protection in certain areas when specifically heat is shut down? And I'm thinking of, when I read this question, thinking of things like fire suppression systems, but just plumbing in general.
Sure. So in the mindset of thinking about our dock heaters or areas where we have space heaters, area heaters that are natural gas based, a lot of cases those are in place just because we have a lot of turn with dock doors or doors leading to outside the facility. So during a shutdown, that's really minimized and those aren't needed. And in a lot of cases, that's more for personal comfort than it is for actually heating the facility. For heating the facility, the breakdown between, an office environment and a production environment are kind of different, but in general, those set points should be high enough that you're not worried about those sprinkler systems freezing up. Unless you have a dock space or some area where you have a dry system where you don't have to worry about that, then you still need to be concerned about eye wash stations or anything along those lines that might bust. The only other thing I can think of is you might have washers or some other process type equipment that might be in an area that could easily freeze or might be more susceptible to freezing because it's in an auxiliary building, like maybe a maintenance type area. For those, you might need a specific plan. If you're not sure when you're going to return, you might drain those systems completely and treat it like an annual PM. I know we do that in a lot of cases around Christmas time anyways, because it's a prolonged shutdown. So some of those water-based systems we might completely drain over the holidays anyways. But when you don't know when you're going to come back in the building, it might make sense to do something a little more permanent, whereas a Thanksgiving type holiday, you might just leave the whole system running and keep the heat up.
Great, thank you, Kirk. I didn't know, Rich, did you want to add anything?
I was thinking about that too. But if it's a shutdown on electricity, you may not be able to run any kind of heat trace unless it's tied to some kind of backup or so. I know that we've run into that in different instances, maybe not in the Carolinas, but, where we had like number 6 oil or such, we're running some big boilers. We had to have heat trace out there in case of that kind of an emergency, and then have some kind of backup maybe for the plant. So maybe another way to approach it.
Great. Excellent. So then the next question I have here is for Ted. Just wondering if you can, and sometimes we learn from our failures just as well as we learn from our successes. Can you share with us any examples of curtailment projects, like a specific one that went really well, and then maybe one that didn't, and maybe a lesson learned from that?
Well, a project that went real well was the installation of our 100 horsepower. We have 4 air compressors in the plant, and they range. We got 50 horsepower, 75, a 60, and 100. The hundreds of variable fix. We've added the Intel flow systems to that, to where that was helped us to prevent all these compressors were running at one time. Now we've reduced our energy consumption drastically. I can't remember the exact data on that, but I know it was well over 50% on the energy consumption that we, just by installing these Intel flows, where it regulated all of our air out to the plant. and that variable drive for the installing that 100 horsepower. Our air compressors, we barely have one that runs constantly. So, where in the past, well, years ago, all four would run just to fill our tanks, our supply tanks. And now on the weekends, they don't run at all. And, in lower consumption times, the 50 horsepower may kick in and run for a short period of time, and then just everything just shuts down. So that was one of our successes. One of our, I don't know if there's any real.
You can call it a lesson learned.
Lesson learned. Yeah, lesson learned. I'll tell you one that was lesson learned was on our boiler. I don't know if you remember a couple years back where we had temperatures that went well below freezing for, 300 and some hours, I believe it was, back in January. Well, we decided to shut our boiler down during that time frame, and that was something that was not a good idea. We shut it down completely, and our diesel lines kind of froze up for us. So that was something that we just now, if the temperatures get down below that, we have heaters and things like that to keep that thing running, that line, so our diesel doesn't gel anymore. That's about it for those there.
That's great. Thank you, Ted. Those are all great points. We've got another question, or actually a request to hear some more thoughts from an attendee. And Isaac, if you can speak to this one. The attendee had a question, and they'd like to hear some more thoughts on using periods of shutdown to do treasure hunts and energy audits. Can you just kind of give maybe a top three of things to think about, or maybe who should be involved?
Absolutely. So the reason the treasure hunt concept, and getting buy-in and involvement at the facility level is important. I can come on site and I can perform an energy audit for a customer, or one of the utilities can provide that same service to a customer, at little or no charge. But it doesn't have the same buy-in as when you have people at the facility that are going through with the facilities manager, finding opportunities, because then there's the buy-in, then there's the ownership, and they're more likely to be acted upon. Just simple things. You can go around taking a look at your lighting system, seeing what types of controls you presently have on the lighting system, if there's any opportunities for fluorescent to LED upgrades. It's relatively simple and straightforward. Going through checking all your water systems, flush valves, aerators on sinks and things of that nature. And then, you might have somebody that, that's there working at your plant that might be knowledgeable about HVAC systems, and, could, conceivably go in and take a look at it, and take a look at the schedule and see if there's, ways to optimize that. And then, of course, I would encourage you to work through whoever you have as a HVAC service provider, if that's something that you outsource. And most of these guys are here locally, Piedmont Service Group, Newcomb, Brady Train, all these guys that provide the same services that we do, provide these energy audit services. So, I would certainly encourage you to reach out to them, but I would do the Easter egg activity first, because then you already have an idea of some of the things that they might be coming in there looking for, and you'll sort of drive a deeper discussion into the opportunities you want to look at.
Okay, great. Thank you, Isaac. This next question, I think Walt's would be kind of perfect for. You'd mentioned that at Santa Fe, you've done a lot of different projects, and so thinking about, and I know that you all aren't down as much now, but what experience do you have with additional benefits other than kind of dollar or energy savings with some of these projects? Are there any things that you kind of didn't factor in or didn't think about that worked out positive for you?
I will say in the warehouse with the LED lighting in there, it's not those old gas lights. So it's actually brighter, which makes it safer for the forklift operators. And then as soon as you leave the area, they shut back off. So that was a positive. With the boiler, upgrading the boiler, they find, you know, the maintenance is a lot easier than the old dinosaur we had, and it's burning less natural gas. Because the boiler is one of our SCUs. The other SCUs is the HVAC systems. We're working. We don't have money for them yet, but we're working on it. The compressor systems, they're all tied together, just like it is down in Goldsboro. So they basically, when they come on in the beginning, they fill everything up, and then they're just sitting there trimming all the time. We also are looking at getting the same system on our vacuum, so they're not running all the time, and that's probably going to be one of our next bigger projects.
Okay, great. Thanks, Walt. Kurt or Rich, it would be interesting to hear kind of from the different levels of perspective. So what types of collaborative tools or resources do you have to kind of make decisions on, you know, the moments kind of leading up to a curtailment, as well as maybe kind of midstream or then maybe afterwards?
I'll jump in there for just part of that. I think that when it comes to curtailments, again, as much notice as you can give some of these suppliers on the shutdown makes a difference, because some of these different suppliers, you know, they could be trading hourly, daily, you know, on larger volumes, or maybe it's more cast over a long term, but the more heads up you can give them in advance notice, you know, the better off you're going to be on that. And I've noticed too, and it's not because Eaton is a large company, because we have a lot of plants at all sizes. It's more of there is something to be said for that relationship with that supplier and working with them, because really they're making money on the sale of the gas, but a lot of the money they make is in the back office. So if they can plan and schedule this better for these shutdowns or unexpected, you know, occurrences, you know, it does go a long ways, I think, with some of the suppliers. You know, I think too many times on electric and natural gas, you look at, you know, they're just there, you buy it, you're done with it. But in some of these, and your local utility is important too, to have a good contact as your representative. You know, that's an important piece in service and uptime and possibly in repairs when it comes to some of these big events.
Not just speaking to this locally, we've seen supply chain hiccups, and you know, the impact of COVID is kind of a hard thing to predict, right? How it'll impact you next week. One of the things that we've seen is as we end up kind of changing our production schedules, with that, our electrical testing, which is our big energy consumer, can get crunched down into a tighter time frame, and that can increase our short-term demand, which could change our peak demand and increase our cost based on our rate schedule. So it really is all about, as soon as we identify those different factors or the different things that are starting to happen, and we can kind of look forward and go, well, how does this impact us from an energy standpoint? And keep that in the back of our head when we're talking about scheduling and trying not to cause too much of a peak demand. And then the exact opposite is true too, right? If we're starting to look and see that demand is starting to decrease on one particular product line or a piece of equipment, that might be equipment that we can go ahead and shut down predictively, right, without having to wait 2 days of it idling to turn off.
Yeah, just to add to that too, I think that's good, Kurt. You know, a lot of the things that you mentioned really apply into demand response programs too, when it comes to cutting back on different key, pieces of equipment or load centers. You know, being able to know your facility enough on where you can make the biggest impact when you still need to run some portion of production, and being able to kind of phase things in and phase things out can help in a demand response program, as well as some of these types of events where it's more of a permanent shutdown.
Right. So those folks that have gone through 50,001 or through those steps, you identify your top significant users, right? And you can kind of look at those during the shutdown and curtailment periods to see what's going to drive that demand.
In your point about, I'm sorry to jump in here again, but that was a really good point. When it came to setting peak demands, you know, depending on the utility that you have, they're constantly changing how they look at the capacity and peak demand to serve different plants. And so if you're hitting a peak that's unusual because of an event like this, you really need to watch that, because in certain utilities, that can penalize you, and you're held to that capacity piece possibly for up to a year until you kind of bring that average down. So a couple of events can kind of dictate how much you pay going forward.
Great, excellent. I didn't want to stop that conversation. That was a good one. Sometimes you learn a lot about your own internal operations just by talking about them externally. So I didn't want to stop that. So I do want to go back to a question that I had asked earlier, and actually I'll direct this one to Isaac. And Isaac, definitely feel free to leave any clients' names out or customers' names out. But do you have any examples of some curtailments or an energy project that went really well and smoothly, and then maybe one that didn't, and lessons or lessons learned from that?
We'll just go with one that has gone relatively well. It's a medical office training facility, and they're attached to the East Carolina University system. So they were caught up in the shutdown. And the first question I asked them, because we have the maintenance contract for HVAC, and then Envirocon is the controls vendor. So we have a good relationship with Envirocon, and so we work together with them to modify their occupancy schedule and their set points so that they could operate with very limited staff or no staff, and help them out that way. And of course we'll have to wait and see for utility bills that come out at the middle of the month here and around the 20th to see what kind of impact that we've had. But we can sort of see what's going on through Building Sentinel, through the building analytics platform, and that we're able to maintain our set points on this unoccupied schedule. So that's gone really well for us. An example of one that hasn't gone well, I don't have one of those, but recently listened in on a webinar where they were discussing the knee-jerk reaction. Some folks, I don't know anybody that would do this, but if they have a building automation system, they're just going in there and shutting down all the power, and that would be a bad situation, especially if you have set points on the BAS that don't have any sort of backup. So you could lose set points and have to go through the process of re-entering those and recommissioning the equipment. So definitely something that you don't want to do. And to Kirk's point, you want to follow a checklist and make sure that the process is very structured and that you don't lose any of that information during the process.
Great, thank you. And you know, to some degree we can't talk about energy, be it electricity or natural gas, what have you, without pulling in water as well. Obviously, we need energy to move water around for the most part. And so, you know, I want to direct this one to Ted. And if you don't have any examples, that's okay. We can move around, but um, any type of thought processes in terms of especially potable water use, drinking water fountains, et cetera, and in relation to human health?
Yeah, we actually we had a project not too long ago where it was very simple. We changed all of our faucets and everything to half-gallon flows. All of them had like a 1.5 gallon. We've changed all of those. We've reduced some of our water consumption. We also have, similar to rain barrels, we use that for watering gardens. I mean, you know, for the potable water, yeah, we've just reduced our consumption by adding those little half-gallon per minute. Can't even think of what they're called right now, Lord. But anyways, and then we, like I said, we got rain barrels, but they're the large 260-gallon containers that we've actually have those coming off of the roof. So we use that same water to water our gardens, to clean filters, you know, for our smog hogs and things like that. So we reduced a lot of our water consumption here just in the past 6 months to a year now.
Great, thank you. I guess this might be open to all the panelists, but are there any concerns at your facilities about you know, potable water use upon startup? All right. Oh, somebody chimed in here. Who's?
I was going to say that with us, we're still running, but to marry on to pair up with the irrigation water, we have a catch basin that takes all the water off the driveways, and then we have a solar pump that pumps it all back up and does the irrigation for all the building frontage, and that has saved us like 30 million gallons of water. I mean, it's just incredible how much water that has saved us from purchasing just for the sprinkler system. I know it's not the potable water that you wanted to talk about, but there is benefits to, if you want to even have the front of the building look better, that you can use rainwater.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously using rainwater puts less stress on the water system as a whole. So great. I guess, Walt, since you kind of chimed in, you kind of got the last minute or two here before I kick it back to Terry. What, you know, just during thinking about downtimes in general, do you have any examples of maintenance or even training programs that staff, you know, can do to think about coming out of this even stronger?
If you are in a shutdown right now, like they said earlier, we should try and get as much maintenance done as you can, because if you have a more efficient system and running, you're going to use less energy. Plus, it makes you more familiar with the systems because you might not have looked at that often, so it would be also a training opportunity. So then when you come back up, you can actually maintain it better because you understand it better. I don't know
Great
if that's
thoughts.
going to go with that, but
No, that's perfect. That's some great thoughts there, and I appreciate everybody during the Q&A. And I want to turn it back over to Terry. And Terry, I do have one additional question here, but I'll kick it back to you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Scott, and thank all the panelists here. As we mentioned, Bobby Moore was invited to participate in our Q&A, and he is an account executive with Duke Energy, covering both Duke Carolina and Duke Progress territories and large accounts. When Unfortunately, he was not able to attend because of the storms, as I'd mentioned, but we floated a few questions by him that we had been hearing from our customers, and we thought we'd get some feedback. So I'm just going to run through these in the last few minutes here that we're going to wrap up at 3:45. The first question was around payment flexibility. And so with many folks in shutdown mode, having, businesses struggling to meet payroll and just a myriad of issues, Duke is advising folks that there's not going to be any late fees to pay what they can, and they will not be disconnected for non-pay during this period. So not sure how everything's going to come out of that, but that's what they're advising their customers right now. These are, large customers as well. This was a question that also came in about what about demand charges for certain rate structures. Some folks have a contract demand, and if they don't use that contract demand, they, depending on which rate structure you're at, you may be charged 50% of that as a demand for the month. So Duke is not at complete liberty just to change their rate structures without getting that approved from the Public Utility Commission, from the Utility Commission in North Carolina. But there is a case in front of them right now where the Carolina Utility Customers Association is advocating for some of that flexibility. So I think that's something that is being worked on, and I guess more to follow. And we also asked Bobby about any checklists from the utility supplier end about startups or shutdowns with their large accounts. And they didn't have anything specifically to share, but as Ted covered, they really were suggesting bringing up loads slowly, bringing on individual breakers, and doing that in a systematic way. And then also, you can be cognizant that you don't hit a peak demand for the month by doing that as well. So that's a little feedback from Bobby. On this slide as well, there's some direct phone numbers for their business and industry folks from both Duke Carolinas and Duke Progress. So encourage you to be in contact with them when you're making changes, when you're doing curtailments, when you're doing shutdowns. Like we've heard from all of our speakers, that communications with your utility is really key. And there's some contact information for Bobby. There's a number of account reps throughout the state, and he serves the West, but reach out to yours or call these numbers if you need that help. Okay, so we were just going to leave a couple of resources. Here's the contact information for Scott Pfister and myself. Scott is a coach with the Environmental Stewardship Initiative and is available, so his phone and contacts are there. All of our speakers today that presented were part of the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, so please check out that program. It's an excellent resource here in North Carolina for peer sharing for large organizations and manufacturers. And then the contact information for myself with Waste Reduction Partners. We have a number of no-cost services, including energy audits and water efficiency work as well. And we're really pleased to be part of this webinar today. So with that, I really want to thank all of our panelists today for taking time. I think some fantastic information was shared in the midst of everyone trying to figure out how to deal with COVID-19 and all the impacts it's had on all of our organizations. So I want to appreciate extend that appreciation out to all of our panelists and thank all of our attendees. As you exit from this webinar, we do have a really brief survey. We've got a couple questions about some other topics we're considering hosting webinars on. And I want to let everyone know that this will be recorded and you'll receive an email link. On the Waste Reduction Partner website, we've created a page where all of these resources will be available in the presentations, at least in in some format will be available for you to access. So again, thank you so much for attending, and have a great afternoon.